A waterway that would connect the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, a feat of engineering that became a reality in the 19th century. The Suez Canal was dreamed up by former French diplomat Fernand de Lesseps. He managed to secure funding for the project and construction started in 1859. 10 years later, and thanks to thousands of Egyptian labourers, this huge shipping link opened to international acclaim.
Egypt paid a very high price for digging the Suez Canal. In return, what did the Egyptian people got? Occupation.
The waterway may have officially belonged to Egypt, but it was de Lesseps' Suez Canal Company that held the concession to operate it for 99 years. Initially a Franco-Egyptian corporation, Imperial Britain bought out the Egyptian shares in 1875. As a vital commercial channel, the canal was the object of various power struggles during the First and Second World Wars. In 1956, its history took a decisive turn when Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser abruptly nationalized the waterway. On July 26th of that year, the Egyptian army was deployed to both sides of the canal.
We moved to Ismailia on the same day of nationalization and took over the offices in Ismailia, Port Said, Suez, and Cairo.
Hailed as a victory for Arab nationalism, the move angered France and Britain, who responded with a military offensive backed by Israel to regain control of the Suez Canal. The invasion lasted a week before the UN Security Council ordered their withdrawal, encouraged by the US and Russia. 10 years later, the battle for supremacy raged here once again. The Six-Day War in 1967 saw Israeli forces occupying the right bank of the Channel, a conflict that halted maritime traffic for 8 years due to an Egyptian blockade. Since then, the Suez Canal has undergone significant expansion to allow for an ever-increasing flow of vessels, which have grown bigger in size too. Deeper and wider at its crossing points, now almost 100 ships will be able to pass in its waters every day.
In November 1956, something happened that quietly reshaped the global order. An empire that had ruled nearly a quarter of the Earth's surface. An empire whose currency had dominated global trade for over a century. An empire that once controlled the seas was brought to its knees in just 11 days. Not by a battlefield defeat, not by a revolution, but by financial pressure. This was the Suez Crisis, and it exposed a brutal truth. Global power no longer belonged to Britain, it belonged to the United States. Tonight, we're going to break down what really happened in 1956, why it mattered far beyond Egypt, and why some analysts believe the same pattern could be unfolding again, this time with America. But first, we need to understand how Britain rose to power in the first place. In the 19th century, a Britain wasn't just powerful, it was the system. The British Empire controlled territories across Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and the Americas. At its height, it governed roughly 25% of the world's land and population. London was the financial capital of the planet. The British pound sterling was not just a currency, it was the global reserve currency. International trade contracts were written in pounds. Central banks held their reserves in pounds. Commodities were priced in pounds. Global shipping was insured through London. This gave Britain extraordinary advantages. It could borrow cheaply. It could run trade deficits without immediate consequences. It could fund military operations across continents. It could print money with global demand backing it. If that sounds familiar, it should. Because today, more the US dollar plays that exact role. But even at the height of its dominance, cracks were forming beneath Britain's surface. By the late 1800s, something historic happened. The United States surpassed Britain as the largest economy in the world. American industrial output exploded. Steel production soared. Railroads connected the continent. Oil, electricity, and mass manufacturing reshaped productivity. By 1913, the U.S. was producing more goods than Britain, Germany, and France combined. And yet, the pound remained dominant. Why? Because of financial inertia. Global trade systems don't switch overnight. Banking networks, contracts, insurance markets, they were all built around London. Even as America grew stronger, the old system remained in place. But then came World War I. World War I changed everything. Where Britain financed the war largely through borrowing, especially from American banks. By 1918, Britain had gone from the world's largest creditor to one of the world's largest debtors. It owed massive sums to the United States. Its industrial base was weakened. Its gold reserves were drained. Its economy was stretched thin. At this moment, Britain had a choice: accept its reduced position or pretend nothing had changed. It chose pride. In 1925, under Chancellor of the Exchequer Winston Churchill, Britain returned to the gold standard at its pre-war exchange rate. This was a disastrous decision. The pound was overvalued. Britain's economy had shrunk, but its currency was priced as if nothing had happened. To defend that exchange rate, interest rates were kept high. Exports became expensive, unemployment surged, growth stalled, and the policy strangled British industry. Economists like John Maynard Keynes warned it would cause economic pain. They were ignored. Sound familiar? When governments defend prestige over productivity, reality eventually pushes back. During the Great Depression, global investors began attacking the pound. Speculators saw the math didn't work. In 1931, Britain was forced off the gold standard. The pound lost roughly 30% of its value. Yet even then, Britain maintained influence by forcing its colonies to hold reserves in pounds through what became known as the sterling area. India, Australia, large parts of Africa and Asia. They had little choice. The system was held together by obligation and imperial structure. But empires do not last forever. World War II devastated Britain financially. The country borrowed heavily from the United States under the Lend-Lease program. By 1945, Britain's debt exceeded 200% of GDP. Infrastructure was damaged. The empire was financially unsustainable. In 1946, Britain received a massive $3.75 billion loan from the U.S., but on strict conditions, including making the pound convertible. That convertibility triggered a currency crisis almost immediately. Britain was surviving not because of strength, but because of American patience. And then came 1956. In July 1956, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. The canal was critical. It connected Europe to Middle Eastern oil. It symbolized British imperial power. Britain, alongside France and Israel, launched a coordinated military operation to retake it. Militarily, it was working. But geopolitically, it was a disaster. U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower opposed the invasion. He saw it as colonial aggression that would push developing nations toward the Soviet Union during the Cold War. So the United States applied financial pressure. America threatened to dump British pounds on the market, block Britain's IMF emergency loan, refuse financial support. Britain's currency reserves were evaporating at around 100 million pounds per week. The country was days away from financial collapse. Prime Minister Anthony Eden backed down. Within hours, Britain agreed to a ceasefire. The invasion ended, and so did the illusion of British superpower status. The empire didn't fall in one battle. It fell when its creditors said no. Now let's talk about the uncomfortable comparison. Today, U.S. debt to GDP is above 120%. So the interest payments are projected to exceed $1 trillion annually. The U.S. runs persistent trade deficits. The U.S. maintains over 700 overseas military installations. The U.S. dollar remains the global reserve currency. Oil is largely priced in dollars. Treasury bonds are considered safe assets. Global trade clears through dollar-based systems. But changes are happening. China and Russia increasingly trade in local currencies. BRICS nations are exploring alternative payment systems. Central banks are diversifying reserves. Does this mean collapse is imminent? Not necessarily. The United States still has the largest economy in nominal terms, the deepest capital markets, technological dominance in AI and semiconductors, military superiority, demographic advantages compared to Europe and Japan. But history shows something important. Reserve currency status doesn't disappear slowly. Confidence erodes slowly. Then it breaks suddenly. Britain's decline took decades. The Suez humiliation took 11 days. When a reserve currency weakens dramatically, imports become more expensive. Inflation spikes. Interest rates rise. Government borrowing costs explode. Living standards fall. For Britain, this meant a long period of austerity, decolonization, and reduced global influence. For any modern superpower, the consequences would ripple across global markets. But here's the key difference. The global financial system today is far more interconnected than in 1956. A rapid dollar collapse would damage not just America, but the entire global economy. That makes sudden collapse less simple, but not impossible. When the Suez Crisis wasn't just about Egypt, it was about denial. Britain refused to align its military ambition with its financial capacity. It clung to prestige instead of adjusting to reality. And when reality forced the issue, it was brutal. Every empire believes it's different. Spain believed it. France believed it. Britain believed it. History suggests no nation is permanently immune to debt arithmetic, but history also shows something else. Decline is not automatic. Countries can reform, they can adapt, they can rebalance. The real danger isn't debt alone, it's refusing to acknowledge limits. Britain's fall wasn't caused by one phone call. The phone call simply exposed decades of accumulated imbalance. Whether America faces its own Suez moment depends on choices made now. Fiscal discipline, industrial policy, geopolitical strategy, and economic reform. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it often rhymes. And if we ignore the rhyme, we risk hearing the echo too late. If you found this breakdown valuable, make sure you subscribe, because the next global turning point won't announce itself in advance. And when it comes, it will move fast.